When he turned his back from shoulder to shoulder, it looked like as wide as the tailgate of a truck.
And just darkness, literal darkness, just came like all over, just all over me except where I was standing.
This thing let out the most blood-curdling, mind-blowing, spine-tingling scream that you've ever heard in your life, and it cut through me like a knife.
And I knew that they were going to take me. I just knew it. And then the next thing I can remember is being levitated.
Well, when I look in there, I see two big eyes staring back at me.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Bump Podcast, a place for the believers of the unexplained, monsters, and paranormal. Join us, and we'll go face to face with what goes bump in the night. Hey there, believers. I got a great episode for you today. Don't let my tone of voice, or if you're watching this, how I look, mislead you. I'm feeling a little under the weather, feeling a little rough. I have a sinus infection. My wife's in the other end of the house sick. Not COVID this time, so we're good. But you know, when you feel wore out and you feel like not doing much of anything, that's exactly when you need to just get up and go, right? And I definitely don't want to miss this discussion with Kevin Paul. He's an accomplished author. He sent me 2 copies of his books. Well, 1 copy of 2 books. It's Haunted Hills and Hollows, What Lurks in Greene County, Pennsylvania. First book he wrote, he co-wrote with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and I'm gonna hold it up here so those that are watching on YouTube can see it. It's a great book. He has accounts of different things that went on specifically in and around Greene County, Pennsylvania. When I was reading through it, I got especially interested in a lot of these things. You know, he talks about burial mounds, you know, Native American burial mounds, the Adena people. You know, Greene County, Pennsylvania is pretty close to where I'm at here in West Virginia. It's across the state line, you know, but we share a lot of history. Another one being winged humanoids. He has in chapter 16. Talks about Mothman. So we're going to get through this. We're going to get in through the book here. I'm really interested to talk to him. I don't know about any kind of personal experiences he's had or anything like that. But, you know, like I say, everybody's got a story, right? Everybody's got something that's went on that they just can't quite explain. So in just a moment, I'll go ahead and bring him on the show. All right, stand by. While we wait for Kevin to join us, I want to go ahead and just invite everybody to come onto Patreon. I know everybody's got a Patreon and you can't support everybody's shows. I get that. There's only a couple out there that I support myself at this point. It gets expensive and it's the holidays. I understand that. That being said, the Bump Podcast on Patreon, I have 5 tier levels to choose from, going from $2 up to, I think the highest tier is $30. Depending on what tier you're at, there's merch that they send out every few months. There are there's bonus content. There is extra episodes, a little behind the scenes stuff that I do every once in a while. I'm going to try to get extra episodes out there, you know, once or twice a month at least. You know, $2, that's for the, you know, just the general show and support kind of thing. About a cup of coffee a month. So there's something for everybody, you know, to fit everybody's budget. And I just wanted to throw it out there. I'm not really good at asking for 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 anything. So I'm just inviting you to come join it. Come check it out. I started Patreon back in January, and so there's tons of stuff to get on there and see at this point. You know, it's been pretty much a full year. Other podcasters can tell you Patreon is a very slow growing kind of thing. At this point, I have like 7, maybe 8 subscribers. So there's not a whole lot, but they get to see this content. They're the only ones. So at some point, you know, I'll occasionally go through the archives and release that to the public after a few months. But things like my Sunday musings, I'm starting to put them exclusively on Patreon. That way, they have a little something just for them, you know, just a thank you on top of the merch, on top of getting early releases on every episode. I want to do more, you know, because I really appreciate the support. You know, I'm a one-man show here, and at the moment, I have 0 sponsors. So I'm doing what I can. You know, everybody knows what it's all about. And at the end of the day, we got to pay bills, right? So I invite you to come up, check out Patreon. If you don't like it, that's fine. If you like it, awesome. Glad to have you. No matter what, I'm going to try to keep putting this out every single week. Schedules are tight. Everybody's busy. But so far, we're creeping up on 100 episodes. I haven't had to miss a week yet. So keep on trucking. All right. Let's go ahead and bring on Kevin.
Well, good evening. Thanks for having me on. I'm Kevin Paul. I live in Greene County, Pennsylvania. I'm born and raised here. My family's been here since roughly the time of the Revolution. So I come from a pretty strong Western Pennsylvania Appalachian farm background. Got versed in a lot of folklore in combination with old time gospel. So that's sort of the approach I use. That's my my spiritual belief. That's the approach I use to interacting with the paranormal. Like a lot of the listeners, I'm a lifetime experiencer. A number of years ago, I was working in Delslow, West Virginia, just outside of Morgantown, and my supervisor didn't care what we listened to at work as long as we got our work done. And I was also involved with helping some people try to figure out what was going on at a location that was fairly haunted. And long story short, I heard Rosemary Ellen Guiley streaming online, reached out to her by email, not expecting to ever hear from her. She returned my email, and not only did we work together for about 12 years, but we became very close friends, extended families. She was the one that encouraged me to get involved in writing the first book, Haunted Hills and Hollows, But Lurks in Greene County, Pennsylvania. And regrettably, she has since has passed, but the sequel just came out this past October. It's Haunted Hills and Hollows 2, Still Lurking in Greene County, Pennsylvania. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I got involved in being published.
I love it.
Thanks.
Yeah, Rosemary, I think I have a couple of her books. She's wonderful, ain't she?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
She I didn't know what to I didn't know what to expect. I didn't realize she's such a rock star. And as she pulled in, we were our youngest daughter was maybe 10 or 11 at the time, if that. And she pulled in, we were out and she got out of the vehicle, and I used to kid her. I said I was expecting someone that looked like a celebrity, and she looked like a biker chick. And I thought, well, we can get along with her because she's, you know, pretty down to earth. But she was remarkable.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Absolutely. So you said you're a lifetime experiencer.
Correct.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, Kevin, would you tell me a little bit about some of your experiences? Are they paranormal? Are they cryptid? What are we talking about here?
The first one I actually remember is similar. Going back to the first book, most of the people that are mentioned in that book, I actually know fairly well. So I didn't have to really, there wasn't any struggle to establish credibility. The person we refer to as Art Hawk talked about seeing a light being. I had a very similar experience. I was fairly young. Woke up in the middle of the night. I shared a bedroom with two brothers. Woke up in the middle of the night, and there was, if you can imagine, a shadow person only made out of light standing in the bedroom. And of course, you know, you're a kid, you run downstairs, you wake your parents, and they assure you it's a dream. But when I mentioned it to my grandmother, you know, her take on that kind of stuff was a little different. So that was the first one I really remember. I've had premonitions. As I've gotten older, I have a lot of premonitions. I've seen a lot of shadow people. I have seen human apparitions, but mostly what I see, I tend to refer to as non-human entities. They might be humanoid, but some of them actually sort of defy description, unless you look at the folklore.
Yeah. Yeah. Are we talking like maybe angelic beings or something a little more nefarious, or?
Both. I have, I did actually see what I pretty sure was an angel one night in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, standing along the roadside. But I've seen more nefarious things as well. And then I've also, it kind of runs the gamut. It's kind of a little hard to put a finger on. I may have seen Sasquatch once, but most of what I see is humanoid shapes or disfigured ones, but still humanoid.
Yeah. I know it's probably hard to describe and might not be easy to talk about, but I assure you, there's no judgment here, man.
Oh no, it's not that. It's just sometimes it's hard to find the words.
Yeah. I've heard it all, and I've seen quite a bit myself. You know, I've had some experiences too. This light being that you talk about, that I find that super interesting right off the bat. It being your first experience, I imagine you were fairly young, right?
I was 4 or 5, so I was pretty young.
Okay. Can you remember any features, or was it just like basically a silhouette of light?
It was a silhouette of light. It appeared like it was likely male.
Okay.
But other than that, I don't recall getting any information from it at all. I did undergo regressive hypnotherapy or hypnosis, whatever the proper term is, earlier this year, and went back to that. And I apologize, I don't have the notes in front of me, but it seems that this particular entity came and went in a location. It was on my grandparents' farm, just above my parents' house, and closely associated with a water source. And apparently, from what I learned that night, I wasn't the first member of the family that it had reached out to, but the last one had been like in the 1920s, so it had been a while. So it seems like it was attached to the ground there. Or at least that's where it liked to come and go. So this is all in Greene County, PA.
Yeah. Yeah, that, you know, at the same age, my daughter, when I first moved home from the Air Force, this was 2009, November. We moved in, you know, because like I said, I had just moved back, and my grandmother had passed away about 2 months before I got home. So I moved into her place. and my daughter was, she was about a month away from turning 5 years old at the time. And I take her into what would be her bedroom, and I tuck her in or whatever. And I go about my business. I go, get something to drink or whatever. And I come back and just check on her. And I try to reassure her because she's still awake. I ask her if she's afraid, tell her everything's going to be okay. I know it's a new place or whatever. And she said, no, I'm not scared. The white man told me I would be okay.
Yeah.
And she described it the same way, that it was just a man of light. And that's when you said, that light being, and it's the same age. And I feel like there's comfort there for children, that's why.
I don't remember being frightened as much as trying to figure out what it was.
Yeah.
And, but I don't ever remember discussing any of this stuff with my parents as a child. I discussed some of it with my dad real late in his life, but most of the time it was my grandmother in particular. The Hopkinsville Goblins, you remember that story?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I'm a kid, and there used to be that weekly or bi-weekly paper. I think it's a magazine now called The Grit, and they ran a story about the Hopkinsville Goblins, and I remember mentioning it to my grandmother, and I'm not faulting my mother here, but my mother's response would have been something like, "Well, they were drinking, or it was their imagination."
Yeah.
My grandmother's response was, she pointed out that when the authorities went back the next day, there was 30-06 casings laying all over the ground. And, that costs money. And you live out in the country and you don't pull weapons out because, it gets to that point, you mean business, plus it's an investment. And her thing was, obviously they were shooting at something, but nobody knows what it was. And that kind of stuck with me. So I, in hindsight, I guess she didn't discourage me. I can see her hand in some of this because, it was Protestant Christianity and folklore, and you blend the two.
Yep. Yeah, I wouldn't have it any other way, man.
Yeah, really.
I love it.
More people need to do it. We'd solve some of the problems in the world, I think.
Yeah. We just need to accept that there's things out there that are spiritual.
Exactly.
It just is what it is. There's spiritual beings out there.
Well, one of the most striking things to happen to me this year, my wife and I were set up at a local festival, and a pastor's wife asked me what happened to people after they died. And I was like, well, don't you know? I mean, and there's some work needs to be done, I guess, by all of us. But, obviously the spirit world's real and it surrounds us. And my thing is it's sort of like reading the almanac. You do things by the signs, and you can interpret the paranormal by the sign, but you have to pay attention and study it long term, not just go in and go out with your electronics. You have to stick with it and find out what it is they do or do not want you to do. But they'll tell you, but it takes time because we don't, we're the ones that don't understand, not them.
Right.
In my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think once they're on that other, that other plane, that other dimension, whatever you want to call it, on the other side, they are obviously, maybe not every haunting or whatever you want to call it, but there's an intelligence, there's an awareness.
Oh, very much.
They either try to communicate or they try to get you to leave them alone, but they're aware of us way more than what we are of them, I think.
Oh, I agree.
So
I've seen, apparitions of humans that I think without a doubt were human ghosts.
Mhm.
But the majority of the stuff I've seen goes beyond that. And like you say, a lot of times the human hauntings are repetitious, or the apparition is not exactly aware of your presence. But these other things, these non-human entities, there's an intelligence to them, long-term. A couple cases, and we can talk about it if you want to. There seems to be both strategy and tactics involved.
Mhm.
In the first book, the chapter about angry spirits of the land, there was some non-human entities there that just wanted us out of there, and they took very specific steps in a certain order, and eventually we pulled the plug on the investigation. But it had run over a course of a couple years. And the same thing at the Greene County Historical Society Museum, which is mentioned in both books.
Yes.
More so in the second book, I picked up on this. It was the same pattern, and they were using the same tactics. And you could, I was just an observer, but you could pick out, you sort of had in mind what they're going to do next based on past experience. And it's kind of a stretch for me to believe that humans would do that. This was pretty advanced for something that most cases just, for humans, they seem to appear and walk through the room, or they seem to be attached to an object or something like that. These things would follow you around the grounds. They'd leave the building. In the case of the farm, there was one that would follow you off the property, and it's hard to convince me that that's human. I think it goes beyond that.
Yeah, I do too. I think when that kind of stuff happens, when something starts attaching to you or presenting themselves as something innocent, obviously to try to gain your trust, for you to lower your guard, I think there's something darker that it could be. And I know a lot of people don't like to use the word, but are you referring to these things possibly being demonic in nature?
Yeah, but if you're familiar with some of Michael Heiser's work,
okay, I love this. I love where this is going.
Okay, all right. Well, you and I, okay,
fan.
you and I on the same page. I honest, I'm not kidding you. Rosemary and I had this same conversation over about 3 years, because she was trying to get through to me that not all demons work for Satan, and I just was having trouble wrapping my head around that till regrettably, after she'd passed, I watched Michael Heiser on YouTube.
Yeah.
And he came out with supernatural beings with supernatural powers that aren't God, and it was like an epiphany. It's like, oh, this is what she was talking about. So now I find myself in conversations with people and say, well, yeah, there's a lot of demonic stuff, but they don't necessarily work for Satan. And one of the examples I use, which irritates people sometimes, you say, well, if the Marvel universe were true, it's demonic, because those guys can do whatever they want.
Right.
And it's like, oh, no, it's fantasy. And I said, well, yeah, but if it was true, like Spider-Man, shooting stuff out of his. So I don't know. I really appreciate what Heiser's work there, because and I think that's kind of a failing right now. It's like the Hollywoodization of the paranormal, where everything's all rosebuds and unicorns and fairy dust, and some of this stuff will slap you around if you don't play by the rules.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I've read The Unseen Realm by Heiser.
Yes.
I've listened to him on several podcasts. I listen to his podcast from time to time, he's just a little too smart for me sometimes. I can, you know, on
yeah,
his podcast, he goes pretty deep, and I'm like, wow, you know,
I found, yeah, you got to watch it 2 or 3 times. In the case of the Unseen Realm, I've got a copy, and it's got a lot of highlights in it, and I got to go back through it. And I mean, you have to read it and reread it and reread it. Then finally, it clicks. But you know, this stuff, had it been taught openly, the world would be a different place, I think.
I agree. I think the supernatural worldview is definitely something that has been lost in our faith for sure.
Oh, I agree.
You know, even a lot of Christians say, you know, ghosts aren't real. You know, it's like that. I don't understand how you can wrap your head around that. You know, it says in the Bible, you know, doesn't Jesus say something to the effect of, "Do not be afraid, I'm not a ghost"?
Correct.
If ghosts weren't real, he wouldn't say that.
Correct.
Like Heiser said, if necromancy wasn't possible, they wouldn't warn against it.
Correct.
You know, these things are literally real, and we need to be aware of it. That it's not, like you said, all fairy tale. And we live in a supernatural world.
Correct. And Hollywood has we've let the entertainment industry define everything. You know, I said a couple nights ago that Disney has now made Tinkerbell cute and voluptuous, and that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
But that's what we've got to deal with. So
yeah, it is. It is. And I personally, you know, you can call me conspiracy theorist or whatever, but I think it's intentional that Hollywood would try to desensitize and normalize these things, again, to lower our guard, so people won't be afraid to dabble with these things that, you know, they might not want to give power to.
Well, you won't get any argument from me. It is to desensitize people, and when they do finally appear to everyone, not just those of us who see them now, some of us will know how to tell good from bad, and a lot of people won't, and it's going to be because they've been desensitized by this stuff. And I'm not a fan of, I didn't read the books. I went to some of the Harry Potter movies, and I really didn't care for them because they were showing stuff that I'd seen. I mean, you know, the owls delivering messages, and the black shadows representing death. And I can remember leaning over to my wife when we took our daughter to one of them. I don't know which one it was. And I said, you know, this is the kind of stuff, you know, this stuff's real.
Yes, it is.
And but it's dressed up as fantasy, and then, you know, you leave the theater and supposedly it never happens. But you know, this came up this week. There's starting to be chatter about re-enchanting the world and that sort of thing. And you know, you say, I'm going to go to the enchanted forest, and everybody thinks it's you're following the yellow brick road. And there's lots of things in the enchanted forest, you know, and not all the dragons are like the ones in Shrek. And
Amen.
And the thing I'm trying to do is figure out, and it's a constant thing, is try to, you know, you've got your core beliefs in the Trinity,
right?
But yet receiving messages from the other side, and you know, because like a lot of people that follow Appalachian beliefs, I can dowse,
right? And
I don't do it often, but I do it. But it's not what I base my decisions on, and I it's kind of a constant struggle with me. And when you get into the second book, I had about a 2-year series of very unusual dreams that culminated in encountering in real life people from the dreams. And one of them seems to be an Iron Age Irish deity, the Morrigan, and I had an awful time with that. That's in the second book, the chapter called Close Encounters of the Celtic Kind.
Nice.
And I had a lot of trouble with that because, you know, if you want to talk to people about the Morrigan, you can't, well, at least in this community, you can't go to the clergy because they're not versed in it. So you reach out to people you've met in the paranormal community. And I talked to a couple of people, and then one of them is detailed in the book. And I did get a book written about, it's called Priestess of the Morrigan. The second half of the book was how to worship her. I wasn't interested in that. I read the first half to get the background information, and that was very helpful.
Right.
But I'm starting to come to the conclusion, you know, just as the Bible's full of parables, the rest of the spirit world can, and I'm not talking the human spirits, I mean the other ones, communicate the same way in metaphors. And you have to like painstakingly take your time and study it. And then when you look at the folklore, it'll tell you what's being told to you, but you have to read the lore. So right. If that makes any sense, so that's kind of where I'm at now, trying to navigate, I sort of have a foot in three worlds, you know, one the material world, or the present, one the spirit world, and then there's also the challenge of being the, you know, the Christian in the room full of, you know, people throw around terms like pagans and witches and stuff, but they don't actually know them.
Right.
They're, for the most part, well, you know, we have some really remarkable conversations and thought-provoking. From my standpoint, and as subscribing to Appalachian folk beliefs, you know, I can accept their lore,
right?
But I don't, you know, my worship's entirely different.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at. And that's my approach to the paranormal. You know, God created it all.
Yep.
And it's up, you know, and it comes down to, you know, we have to take the time to figure it out, and it's our choice, you know, it's free choice. We have to try to make informed choices as to what we're going to do.
Yes. Yeah. I'm right there with you. I agree.
Okay.
100%. I'm all about, you know, I can follow the lore, and I know what, you know, some of these, you know, I had a book that I purchased. I don't have it in front of me, but it's called Backwoods Witchcraft. Okay. Now the title's very catchy, but it's Appalachian folklore and remedies. Yeah. And so I get the book, I'm start reading through it, and yeah, it tells you things that almost sounds like spell casting or whatever, but it's not. You're quoting the Bible. You quote certain verses to get rid of burns, and it works.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
It's just stuff that we grew up with here. You know, it's things that we believe, but it's rooted in Christianity. It's rooted in faith in God. And I had some hate mail sent to me that said I was a hillbilly witch, and I wouldn't know a church. I wouldn't know a Christian if I passed one in a church, and, you know, it's all kinds of hate. But they don't understand where, you know, where you and I would come from.
Correct.
You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've got that same book. I know that. Yeah. And I used to struggle to figure out how to define where I was, and I read a paper by a gentleman from West Virginia State University called Appalachian Folk Magic and Protestant Christianity.
Yeah. And
I'm reading this, and I thought, holy cow, this guy like nailed it. It's in the bibliography in the second book.
Okay.
And I mean, I could see people from my childhood. I thought, I know these people.
Yeah.
And I have taken some flack, but interestingly enough, mostly from the Christian community. I've got one really close friend that's I'm not sure if you describe her as a pagan or a witch, but she calls me Christian man, and I take it as a compliment because
absolutely.
I mean, we have like respectful, informative conversations about, well, this is what I believe and why, and it's helped me a lot. But you know, you can't tie them up and burn them to the stake because you just can't.
Right.
That's not up to us.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. It's nice to talk to you, Kevin, because people with this particular mindset and viewpoint, we're few and far between, but I think it's growing. You know, there's a pastor down here. I'm sure he won't mind if I mention his name is Josh Robinson. He lives down here in my county, in Logan County, West Virginia. And he's read Heiser, and he talks about the reenchantment. He actually has a podcast called The Sword and Staff, and it's a great podcast.
What did you say his name was?
Josh Robinson. And his show is called The Sword and Staff Order.
Okay. I'm going to, I'll check that out.
Yeah, it's a good show, and it really helps. It helps me to hear, you know, kindred mindsets, you know.
Well, I've had a running conversation with my wife, and I've been married almost 32 years. And I've had a running conversation. The pastor that married us has been a friend of mine forever. And we've had this conversation for a couple of years about, you know, whether or not the spirit world exists. And he will accept what I tell him because he believes in me.
Right.
But just as you say, the church needs to get involved in this because the vacuum that was created, and this is just my opinion, the vacuum that was created when the church made a conscious decision to pursue like it's kind of a materialistic spirituality, it left a vacuum.
Yeah.
And the charlatans are moving in.
Yes.
And I don't consider, I have to qualify that by saying I have to consider like the witches that I know that are legitimate witches and serious about what they do spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
I don't put them in that same category because they're not trying to deceive anybody and they're not doing it for the money.
Right.
And that's sort of my thing with dowsing. You know, you don't do it for money and you don't do it for other people. It's, you know, it's a personal thing.
Right.
And the issue now is, you know, and this thing that really triggered me, the pastor sent me a friend of mine sent me an article about people are once again using hallucinogenics to meet these entities in the other world, and they're completely and totally unprepared, and they're using the term reenchantment. Well, I went to a paranormal expo. It was the Metaphysical Oddities and Paranormal Expo in Moundsville, West Virginia last weekend.
Oh, wow.
And there was a couple vendors there, and they had the term reenchantment. We're going to reenchant the world.
Hmm.
So I reached out to a couple of my friends that are pagans, and they were like because there was red flags with me, and I wanted to see what they thought.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them flat out, the first thing she said was, they're talking possession. These people are going to get stoned and see what's on the other side, and the stuff's going to come back with them. They're going to be possessed. And I thought that was quite interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Because, you know, your guard's down, right?
Yeah.
And it lowers your energy to allow these things in.
Well, you know, the old demon rum. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I used to party, and then one day, it kind of dawned on me I needed to either like sober up or go down the wrong path. And I just decided that it was time to sober up.
Yeah. I've been there too. That's kind of the shape I came back home from the Air Force in. You know, we drank every day.
That's a different world.
Yeah, it was. You know, we drank when things went bad. We drank when things went good. You know,
Yeah.
so
I got you.
you know what I mean. But yeah, gonna shake off those old habits. I'm sorry I got us off track. As soon as you mentioned Heiser, man, I lit up like a Christmas tree.
Well, you know, I haven't done a lot of podcasts, and I've come to the conclusion they're like writing. Once they start, if the muses chatter at you, you got to say what they're telling you. And so if that's the way the conversation goes, I think it's great because that's what we're supposed to be saying.
That's it. Somebody needs to hear it. We need to say it.
Correct.
That's right.
It does me good to hear. Sometimes I think I'm the only one, you know, you start talking Appalachian folklore and everybody goes to the Beverly Hillbillies, you know, and it's like, and I, you know, and it's like going to a paranormal conference. You can pick out the people who are serious and you can pick out the ones that's just dress up. And it's the same with hillbillies. You know, you can spot a real hillbilly because they don't tell you they're a hillbilly. you know, and you can tell just by the way they act or what they say.
Yeah.
And then there's everybody they think if I say the word holler, they're not, you know, you're a hillbilly. Well, not necessarily. And just stuff like that.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. When these books came in, and you know, it says Haunted Hills and Hollows, I couldn't even read it right. You know, I told my wife, I said, I got these 2 volumes. I said, it's Haunted Hills and Hollers. She was like, what is it? And I was like, well, it says Hollows, but you know, she just wanted to correct me, kind of thing, you know.
Well, it was one of those things. We actually had that conversation, and Rosemary said, don't you call it holler? And I said, no. I said, I can't speak for the rest of Greene County. But the part I grew up in, it wasn't holler, and it wasn't hollow, it was holla.
Holla.
Like HOLLAH. And I said, we can't do HOLLAH. And I said, I don't know that I can go for holler, because holler, you know, in our little corner of the world was yelling at somebody.
Yeah.
So we stuck with Haunted Hills and Hollows. I had come up with that part. She came up with the lurking part.
Yeah, I
So
love both.
that's how that came about. But yeah, you're not. That's the second time this week somebody's mentioned that to me about why isn't it holler? Well, it just isn't.
You spell it correctly and I'll pronounce it wrong. It's all right with me, man.
Well, it's like creek and crick. You know, do you have cricks there?
Well, some of us do, but I have creeks. You know,
we've got cricks and runs.
Yeah, we got runs.
Yeah,
it's fun. I wouldn't live anywhere else, man. I swear. Let me get back to some. You're talking about these premonitions that you have.
Yes.
Do you have like visions? Do you see people or entities? Are you seeing through the veil, or what? Can you go into premonition a little bit for me?
I have had premonitions in real time. There was a fire in an apartment complex here a few years ago, and I was driving past it. And as I drove past, this was it was towards the end of the week, and I heard a voice very distinctly say that there was going to be a fire and there would be fatality, and there was. The really disturbing ones usually come in dreams. I don't remember the flight number because I don't have my notes in front of me, but there was a Boeing 737 went down outside of Pittsburgh on approach a number of years ago. Plane basically rolled over and flew straight into the ground, and I saw the entire thing in a dream, and I knew it was the U.S. Air. Well, it was U.S. Airways then. Yeah. I know it was the U.S. Air aircraft from the markings. And I knew there wasn't a living soul on the plane that had any idea what was going on, but it killed everybody on impact. And I think it took them like 2 years to determine the cause. And I had that quite a little bit in advance of the actual event in a dream, but in the some of these prophetic dreams, there'll be something unusual happen while I'm doing something that was very mundane in my waking life. In that particular dream, I was mowing hay out behind my grandparents' house, which I'd done, I mean, I can't tell you how many times.
Right.
And I looked up and watched this plane fly into the ground, and I spent some time figuring out, why would I have a dream about a plane crash? And I was really trying to figure out how it related to mowing hay. And then I never explored the symbolism in the mowing of the hay after I figured out what the dream was. But if you read the chapter about the close encounters of the Celtic kind, I actually took a shot at trying to interpret the dreams. And again, you know, coming from a Christian background, it was kind of a struggle to me figuring out why an Iron Age deity would just like pop up in real time. But
Right.
But I used the folklore to figure it out.
So what'd you come up with for the is there a metaphor for the hay? Was it like a reaping?
I never looked into it. You know what? I probably should, but I didn't write the dream down, so I wasn't keeping a journal then. So all I remember is everything was correct as it would have been in real life, except the plane hitting the ground. I mean, it had the right dog and everything.
Wow.
But so I haven't, mainly because I wasn't keeping a journal then.
Right.
I keep a dream journal now, but.
Oh, wow. So these are like visions, you know, like prophetic visions. You know?
Yeah, you know, I had one, and I've never written this, years ago, that my grandmother had called my parents' house and said that the family cemetery, somebody had robbed the family cemetery, at the graves were open. So my dad and I went to the cemetery, which in the dream wasn't in the right place. It was between our house and my grandmother's. In real life, it was up on the hill behind him. So in this dream, it's real foggy, and the graves are open, and the vaults are open, and the caskets are open, and it's real foggy, and this straight line comes down, and these two figures that were like single dimensional stepped off. One was the Grim Reaper, and the other was an angel with the Book of Life. And I remember in the dream, I said to my dad, "Is like, that's the Grim Reaper." And we're like trying to figure out why death's there. And the angel opens the book and thumbs through it and points to it and says that my name was written in the Book of Life. And he turned to death and he said, "If you have no business here, you have to leave." And he got back on that line and became one-dimensional and slid back up. And at that point, I woke up and I was like drenched in sweat.
Oh, yeah.
But that's the way these dreams come. I mean, when you read the ones about the leading up to running into the morgue, and that was the kind of dreams I was having. And the symbolism becomes more complicated, and you have to like research it to figure it out. But you usually can find the messages. You have to write it down and research it, and then ask for discernment, and then something will happen. You know, you'll get that last piece, and then the next dream starts.
Wow. That's a gift. You know, I love it.
Thanks. I used to think I could read people because I worked retail, but in hindsight, I could read people because I can read people.
Yep. You have the gift of discernment, right?
Yeah, and I'm very thankful for it. We're blessed. We're extraordinarily blessed.
Yes. I feel like my wife has the gift of discernment, and you know the kids hate it. But
I'll bet.
But there's nobody that's going to pull the wool over her eyes. You know, she's sharp, and she just knows. You know, she'll talk to me. We stay up late, and she'll say, "I just know." You know, I can't tell you how I know. She can feel it when somebody's not being honest. She can feel it when something's about to happen. She always knows.
Well, you remember they used to call that women's intuition, and that became sexist. But it's true.
Yeah. 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 Oh man. Well, Kevin, where you want to go from here, man? We haven't talked about your book hardly that much. We touched on a couple of stories, but
I can give you the first book. I wrote about 80% of it. Rosemary wrote the chapter on Rice's Landing and the one on the angry spirits of the farm.
okay.
The rest of it I wrote. And I'm not sure how I got started on this, but I sort of took a historical approach. I had heard all these stories. Some of my ancestors were very German, and they did what Germans do. You know, they just didn't take any crap off anybody. And I got Scotch Irish on the other. And the Reinhardt brothers came to Greene County and skirmished just the Native Americans. There's a lot of bloodshed all over this county that's basically been forgotten. In hindsight, you know, I figure from the standpoint of the Native Americans, they just got pushed, so they didn't have a choice, and they got shoved out. But what I did was, I'd heard all these stories when I was a kid. You know, this place is haunted, that place is haunted, and so I dug out the old Bates history of Greene County, which was published, I think, in 1888, and the stories of some of the Indian skirmishes matched up with where I'd heard about some of this paranormal activity. And then I sort of bent the rules where I was working at the time. The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation had a website you could use at that time where you could, if you were granted permission, you could pull up maps that would indicate the likelihood of having run into Native Americans.
Oh,
and
wow.
this stuff was all lining up. And the thing that really got me going on it was lining up with places that my grandmother had told me where the natives had hung out, according to the family history. So tried a lot of the bloodshed in with hauntings in the case of the like the Crow sisters in the western end of the county, and the Davis massacre and some other stuff. And then in the case of the Historical Society Museum, my ancestors were the original European owners of that piece of property and built one of the buildings that's still there. And there was some bloodshed with the natives there. I have a distant cousin, if I remember the story correctly, all they found of him was some of his hair, and that was it. So we tied that all together. There's a story, there's a chapter called Mysterious Lapping Farm, I think, something along that. There's I had seen a newspaper article from the 1890s about two guys were hunting, and they'd seen what we would call a reptilian. It was a lizard man.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of intriguing story, but it also it's kind of familiar urban legend. These guys are hunting, and the lizard man picks one guy up and carries him away, and his friends rescue him and all that. And I kept thinking, boy, this would be great if I had a corroborating witness. And I just I used to run a farmer's market, and I made an offhand comment to a customer one day, and lo and behold, one of their kids, they lived in a house that was built on the old lapping farm, and one of their kids had seen what looked like a big frog up on two legs, and it hissed at her. And I thought, really? So it turned out they had some remarkable stories about the house that they lived in was haunted. So that kind of took me down a rabbit hole where I looked into some of the really old Native American stuff that academia says is hooey, that is the Moonite people or the Asgen. Mm-hmm. And lizard man came up again at the museum. There's an entity there that I'm fairly convinced guards some artifacts, some of which came from the Lapping Farm. The Lapping Farm was unique in that they found, I've read different accounts. One of them said up to 100 graves of people that were all like 3 feet tall. So they were either children or they were all very small people. And they found 2 adults that had been beheaded and their heads were buried in separate graves. And I, you know, when the first book came out, I was doing some presentations. I was talking about the Asgen, and the guy called me out on it. And he said, well, you're talking about the Adena culture. And I said, no, I'm not talking about the Adena culture. I'm talking about the ones that were here before them. And the guy had the deer to headlights look. So, so there again, you know, that's where the folklore comes in. I don't have any problem with that because, you know, if the Native Americans said there was moon-eyed people here, that's okay with me.
Yep. Same here, man.
Okay. So there's a couple UFO stories in the first book. A guy named Art Huck and the other guy I think we called Fred. They both agreed to this, and this is where I came up with the idea to be hypnotized. They both agreed to do to be regressed. So Art Huck had an encounter with something that in his conscious memory he thought was an owl. This is the next night after he'd seen what appeared to be a UFO on the ground. The next night he had a similar, he went back to the same site to convince himself that he was nuts. And he had an encounter with a really large owl. Well, when he was regressed, it turns out it wasn't an owl. It was more like a machine or a robot.
Wow.
And the other guy, Fred, saw a black rectangle close to the county line between Greene and Fayette County along the Mon River. He was regressed, and he was sort of convinced that what he saw was terrestrial. I don't know what it was or not. It's pretty wild either way. But excuse me, when I was researching that, when I was researching that, I reached out to Stan Gordon, who's in Greensburg, and told him what I had, and he had some eyewitnesses that had seen basically the same thing in the same area. So first book, there's a lobster alien, tries to abduct a woman. There are some winged entities, shadow people, black-eyed kids, some other cryptid activity. The second book, like I said, it's follow up on Art Huck and Fred's experience with UFOs. There was a site east of town, close to the town of Jefferson. The Moordock family had owned it when I was a kid. When I was in high school, you know, it's haunted. Everybody said it was haunted, and there was all these different theories as to what it was. So I, through my work with Rosemary, I had gotten so I didn't use much technology anyway, and I thought, well, this would be a good test case. I actually talked to some psychics, and we looked at it, and we came up with a fairly plausible explanation as to why it's haunted. Used the same technique, looking at the Historical Society again. We looked at it a little bit in the first book. In the second book, I got more into the causes of some of the human hauntings. I don't know. Russ Parker wrote a book called Healing Wounded History. And basically what happens to the land happens to the people and vice versa. So if you read that, if you're familiar with any of Brandon Marsullo's work, where you, in case of emotional stimulation, either happy or sad, you basically record it in the land. The the example, it's recorded for posterity. The example that Russ Parker uses in Healing Wounded History is if something traumatic happens, you sort of send like a distress signal, and it's recorded in the land. And he says the first recorded distress signal is when Cain killed Abel, and God comes and said, "Your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground." Well,
Wow.
God would have already known it, but he specifically mentions that it was calling out from the ground. So we looked at the museum from two different standpoints of the emotional human stuff that would have been involved in the leading up to some of the human apparitions, and then based on past experience and intuition, I had been convinced for years there was non-human entities there, and I think we did a pretty good job identifying them. But again, it goes back to the lore, whether or not you want to accept what somebody's doing in retrocognition. But I had all this evidence from the staff members that worked there. It's like, I heard this, I smelled that, I saw this, and I was pretty sure what was there. So I contacted the Lindsay Miller's, a psychic, lives in Armstrong County, that I've been working with, and she said that she saw. I sent her a picture. What I do is I send her pictures blind and say, "Tell me what you get from this." And she saw a black dog with red eyes. Well, in the lore, I was based on personal experience at that farm in the first book and what was going on at the museum. I was pretty sure that what we'd run into was Jen. And when she said a black dog with red eyes, that sealed it for me.
Yeah, that's Jen.
Yeah. But again, people think gin are blue and they come out of a bottle and they have cuffs on, and
like on Aladdin, right?
Yeah. You get a Harley and a new truck and $10 million.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So this book has it all. Like I told you, I haven't quite finished it yet. I'm about, I don't know, maybe 5 chapters short from having the first volume done, and then I'll jump into volume 2. The crazy thing is, yes, I can say this book has it all, but the fact is Greene County, Pennsylvania has it all.
We don't have a giant reptile.
You're not far from them, though.
No, in fact, I said that to a psychic earlier this year, and she said, "Only because you haven't found it yet." And I'm not sure whether she's joking or not. Rosemary said that this was the most haunted county in America. And I've taken some flack from that, mostly from people from out around Gettysburg. And I said, okay, I've seen a lot of really good stuff from Gettysburg.
Right.
But do you have aliens? Do you have cryptids? And they got some ghosts, but and just east of here is Chestnut Ridge, and you're a West Virginia boy. You're from where's Chestnut Ridge?
Oh yeah, very much.
And we're kind of the foothills, and it's just it's Appalachia. That's the way it is.
That's it. These hills, these hills are haunted. There are spirits here. There's an old darkness here, and
exactly.
I'm working on my own theory in my head about what all this is about, and it kind of ties in with some of the stuff that Heiser might have talked about. Old principalities.
I'm right there with you.
When the earth was flooded, there's a good chance that some of these tallest peaks may not have been submerged, and if you try to escape the flood, you go to the top of the highest mountains. The Appalachian Mountain Range used to be the very highest mountains, so if there's any remnant left over, it would have been in these mountains. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just speculating, but I think there's a darkness that's been here for a long, long, long time.
Well, Heiser talks about wasn't it after the Tower of Babel when everybody split up
Yes.
And fallen angels are put in charge of the different groups of people?
Yep, that's what I'm talking about. The nations were given to me. They were given dominion.
Yeah, and there's where the darkness of your principalities come in.
Yeah.
And I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I think that it's been the dark and bloody ground for that long.
Correct.
I really think so. And I'd be interested. I got a couple of guys that I'll send you information about that might want to get a hold of you if you're open to it. There's a director. He lives in Ohio. His name is Ward Honey, and he's working on his show, his series that he's been doing is called Dark Holler.
Oh, really?
I had him on my show. We talked. I talked to Josh Robinson, the pastor that I mentioned to you earlier, because they've been working on something together, and they're putting out this series, and it's leading them down a rabbit hole. It's led them to other places. I don't want to give all their secrets away because they're I talk to them, they talk to me, or whatever. But it's leading them to another location, and I have a feeling that it could lead them up to Greene County too. I think that all of this is going to be connected. I really believe that.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. If they want to come up, I'd be happy to show them around, or Skype or whatever.
Yeah.
Logan County's not that far away. I should scoot down there and hear this pasture some Sunday.
Yeah. Well, if you ever come down this way, holler at me and I'll meet you. We'll go together.
Okay.
That work for you?
If you could do me one favor, when you finish the second book, give me some feedback on that last chapter. The two male role models in my life are my grandfather and my dad, and their thing was, if you have to talk about what you're doing, it's because you're not doing anything. And so the publishers pushed me, make it personal, make it personal, make it personal. And it was a real struggle for a couple of reasons. One, it kind of goes against the grain, and two, you're kind of treading the line as a Christian or an Appalachian Protestant, old school Christian, saying, "Oh, hey, I ran into this Irish deity," and if you could give me some feedback on that, I'd appreciate it.
Hey, I'd love to. I'd be honored to, man. I
appreciate it.
Will do. Kevin, is there anything else you want to go over real quick? I do have one more question for you.
Sure.
Okay, I might have like 5,000 questions, and we could do this all night long. But
there's email and stuff.
That's right. Bigfoot. You said you think you might have seen a Bigfoot one time. I would love to hear what you saw and what you think Bigfoot is.
Actually, I think I saw it twice. First time was quite some distance away on a gas line right away. It's kind of similar to what's in the book, the first book. Standing next to a tree, and when it realized, I thought it was a bear at first, up on its hind legs till it stepped back, and it didn't walk like a bear. And I don't think I've said this publicly. I saw what I think was one at the Historical Society down along the creek, but I only saw like the top half of it. Whatever this thing was very large, and it was very hairy, and it was upright. I've been asked this several times about what I think Bigfoot is, and I'll give you the same answer I give everybody else. I'm a Greene County farm boy, and if Sasquatch were flesh and blood, somebody would have popped one and had it in front of the courthouse.
Yeah,
I think they're interdimensional, like a lot of this stuff is. Like most of it is. For all I know, Sasquatch, Jinn, and shadow people could all be the same thing. I don't think it is yet because I don't have enough proof, but I think they're interdimensional.
Yeah.
Stan Gordon, if you've ever read any of his stuff or heard him, he's got some Chestnut Ridge, the old lady that let loose with a 12 gauge.
Yeah.
And the thing just vanished. And you've lived in the hills.
Yeah.
That's no flesh and blood creature.
No, what I experienced, what, you know, you hear it, you see stuff get thrown around, but you don't see anything.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, where is it at? If I can hear you talking, where are you at? You know? Yeah, I think you could be right. You know, I think Dogman's the same thing. I think there's something interdimensional about that too.
Yeah, there's I got a Dogman report over the weekend. It was actually from Marshall County, West Virginia, which is just to our west.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't real surprised the area it came from, because in my professional life, I still work 3 days a week with I probably shouldn't give the agency. It's a federal agency associated with USDA. We do soil and water conservation work.
Okay.
So I run those roads. Some I'm not as familiar with them as my coworkers, but this gentleman approached me at that paranormal conference and started talking about where he'd seen what he thought was a coyote, but it morphed into a Dogman while it was running down along this creek. And he said where the creek was, and I thought, oh my Lord, I know exactly where you're at.
Mm.
And so I'm going to send that on to a couple of people. There is a guy locally, he's in the second book. The chapter's called Demon Colon, that tells a very credible story. I've run into a Dogman. I talked to a mother of a guy that saw one. This is mentioned briefly in the book, near a little village of Gerard's Fort. I think they saw what they said they saw. I actually think they saw one.
Yeah.
But if you read the Skinwalker, read about the Skinwalker Ranch, same thing. You know, you might shoot one and you might get a pound of flesh, but that's gonna, you're not gonna, I don't think you're gonna put one of them down.
Right. All right. It's a wild world.
What's that?
There's a wild world out there.
Yeah. Well, it's going to get wilder here as the years go by.
Yes, it is. I think we're just now beginning to see it. I think this is the beginning of the end, honestly.
You've got no argument from me.
Yep. Well, Kevin, it's been wonderful talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.